The palace was silent. Gold walls shimmered under dying torchlight. Once this place echoed with music, with laughter, with praise for the king who built the temple of God. But now, only silence. He sits alone, the wisest man who ever lived, a king draped in royal garments, yet empty inside. The scrolls of his knowledge lie scattered at his feet. The treasures of nations surround him, and none of it means anything. He whispers the words that would echo through eternity. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What does a man gain from all his labor under the sun, when wisdom turns to sorrow and pleasure becomes a shadow? This is not a story of triumph, it is a confession. The journal of a man who had everything, yet discovered that without God, everything is nothing. You've read Proverbs for guidance, you've studied Psalms for comfort, but Ecclesiastes is the moment when a king finally faces himself. Let's step inside Solomon's mind. Before the crown, before the despair, before the revelation. Long before despair filled his heart, Solomon's story began with a prayer. A young king, son of David, stood before the Ark of the Covenant. The throne was his, the people were many, and the burden was heavy. When God appeared to him in a dream, Solomon did not ask for victory, or wealth, or long life. He asked for wisdom, and heaven answered. From that night, the world would never forget his name. The kingdom of Israel flourished like never before. Gold flowed through Jerusalem. Cedar beams from Lebanon built the temple of the Lord. Kings and queens traveled across deserts to hear his words, and scripture says God gave Solomon wisdom and understanding beyond measure. He studied nature from the cedar in Lebanon to the hyssop on the wall. He wrote songs, proverbs, and mysteries of the human soul. His wisdom was unmatched. His fame was unshakable. His reign was called the Golden Age of Israel, but the higher he rose, the further he drifted. For wisdom without obedience becomes pride, prosperity without purpose becomes poison, and pleasure without limits becomes bondage. In time, Solomon's heart turned, not against God but away from him. He sought joy in knowledge, in laughter, in love, in labor, yet every pursuit ended in emptiness. He built a world of splendor, but lost the peace within his spirit. And from that shattered glory he wrote the words that still pierce the human heart. I have seen all the works done under the sun, and indeed all is vanity and chasing after the wind. Ecclesiastes was not written by a young scholar full of ideas. It was written by an old king full of regrets. The man who once built the house of God now rebuilds the ruins of his soul. This book, Ecclesiastes, is not philosophy. It is repentance. The cry of a man who had it all and found it empty. A man who learned that life, without eternity, dissolves like vapor in the morning air. If you've ever achieved something you thought would finally make you happy, and it didn't. If success still leaves you restless at night, then stay to the end, because Solomon's story might just be your own reflection. Let's begin, where his wisdom was tested and his heart was torn between heaven and the world. Chapter 1, The Pursuit of Meaning Under the Sun. He was the first of his kind, a king turned philosopher. Solomon, the thinker who dared to question the very purpose of life itself. When power no longer thrilled him, he turned inward. When gold no longer sparkled in his eyes, he began to ask, what remains when everything a man desires is finally within his grasp? And so began the greatest experiment in human history, not with weapons or armies or inventions, but with the human soul. He tested pleasure, he tested work, he tested knowledge, laughter, wine, and wisdom itself. In his own words, I built great houses and planted vineyards for myself. I made gardens and orchards, and in them I planted all kinds of fruit trees. I made reservoirs to water groves of flourishing trees. I bought servants and had great possessions of herds and flocks, more than any before me in Jerusalem. I gathered silver and gold, the treasures of kings and provinces. I acquired singers and many wives, the delight of men. Ecclesiastes 2, 4-9. He wasn't boasting, he was documenting an investigation. The richest mind on earth turned life itself into a laboratory, searching for meaning under the sun. But what did he find? Pleasure gave a moment's spark, and then vanished. Projects brought pride, and then emptiness. Wisdom expanded his mind, but not his peace, and when the laughter faded, a deep silence fell over the palace once more. He wrote, Then I looked on all the works my hands had done, and on the labor I had toiled to accomplish, and indeed, all was vanity and chasing after the wind. Chasing the wind. the phrase that defines the book. A picture of humans striving, grasping at something you can never hold. You can feel the breeze, but you can't capture it. You can see it move the trees, but you can't keep it in your hand. That's life without God's eternity. Movement, noise, achievement, but no meaning. Solomon used a single haunting phrase again and again, under the sun, 29 times. A worldly perspective. It means, as far as human eyes can see. A life lived in the closed system of time, where birth and death are the only boundaries, where God is distant and heaven is unseen. And from that limited view he found a brutal cycle. Generations come, generations go. The sun rises, the sun sets. The wind circles the earth and returns to its place. The rivers flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. The eye is never satisfied with seeing. The ear is never filled with hearing. Life under the sun is repetition without revelation. We keep building, but we never arrive. We keep learning, but we never understand. We keep consuming, but we're never content. Even wisdom, his greatest gift, became his greatest burden. For as he wrote, "In much wisdom is much grief, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow." Think about that. The man who knew everything realized that knowing everything could not save him from pain. The more he understood the world, the more he saw its injustice, its decay, and the fragility of human joy. This is the cost of living under the sun. It's the ache of a soul that sees too much and yet still longs for something eternal. Solomon's brilliance could catalog the stars, but it could not heal the emptiness in his heart. He could name every law of nature, but not the law that could restore peace to his own spirit. He found that wisdom without worship collapses into despair, and pleasure without purpose dissolves into dust. He began to ask questions that haunt us still. Why do we strive for what will not last? Why do we build monuments that time will erase? Why do we chase meaning in a world that forgets our names the moment we're gone? Every empire he studied crumbled. Every dynasty he watched vanished. Even his own name he knew would one day fade from men's lips. And so, in the stillness of his late years, Solomon wrote down his verdict, not as a scholar, but as a witness. One generation passes away, and another comes, but the earth abides forever. The thing that has been, it is what will be again. There is nothing new under the sun. To a world obsessed with progress, he whispers a truth most refuse to hear. Humanity does not evolve out of emptiness. It only repeats it. He had seen nations rise and fall, dreams born and buried, and he realized that history itself was a mirror reflecting man's restlessness. The wisest man in the world had reached the same conclusion as the tired laborer in the field. Without God, every road ends in the same place, dust. He doesn't end this chapter with anger, but with exhaustion, a holy exhaustion. The kind that comes when a soul finally admits, all I've built, all I've learned, all I've loved, without God's presence, it's wind in my hands. What do you think Solomon meant by chasing the wind? Is it the emptiness after pleasure, the futility of pride, or the hunger for eternity itself? Drop your answer below. I want to hear your interpretation. Because one day, we'll all realize that the same wind Solomon chased still blows through every generation, whispering the same question: what is the meaning of life under the sun? Chapter 2. The cycle of time and the tyranny of seasons. There is a rhythm written into creation, a pulse that beats beneath every sunrise, every storm, every sigh. And one day, Solomon began to hear it. He who once ruled over armies, now listened to the quiet ticking of eternity. He watched the seasons roll like a wheel, unstoppable and unchanging. And from that revelation, he wrote words that would echo through every age. To everything there is a season, and a time for every purpose under heaven. A time to be born, and a time to die. A time to plant, and a time to uproot. A time to weep, and a time to laugh. A time to mourn, and a time to dance. Even now, centuries later, those words carry a strange power. They remind us that life is not chaos, it is choreography. Each moment, sacred. Each season, designed. Even the storms, even the silence. Solomon began to realize something extraordinary. Life isn't meaningless, it's measured. It's not random, it's rhythmic. Everything under heaven moves by divine appointment. He looked at his own life and saw the pattern. There was a time when he was anointed, a time when he reigned, a time when he fell, and a time when he repented. Every rise had its reason, every fall had its lesson. He saw time not as a thief, but as a teacher. He wrote, God has made everything beautiful in its time. And yet, he adds a mystery. No man can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. That line haunts and humbles, because in it lies the truth every wise man learns too late. We live inside time, but God stands above it. You and I can only see fragments, days, weeks, years, but God sees the whole picture from eternity to eternity. We rush, we panic, we demand answers, and God simply says, wait, it's not time yet. Solomon, the impatient king, learned patience from the one who cannot be rushed. There's a time to plant, that's hope. A time to harvest, that's reward. A time to weep, that's release. A time to laugh, that's renewal. A time to mourn, that's surrender. A time to dance, that's resurrection. Each time has a purpose. Each purpose has a place. And each place belongs to God. But the tragedy, Solomon realized, is that men spend most of their lives fighting time, trying to control what only heaven commands. We cling to moments meant to pass. We rush through seasons meant to teach. We resist endings meant to prepare us for new beginnings. Time humbles the proud. The king who built the temple learned that not even he could build a clock that controlled God. The one who commanded nations could not command tomorrow. He wrote again, I have seen the burden God has laid on the sons of men. That burden is time itself, because time reminds us that we are not eternal. We are fragile, passing shadows under an unchanging sun. Empires rise and fade, kings reign and are forgotten. Laughter echoes and falls silent, tears dry and return again. But through it all, God remains the same. The tyranny of seasons is that they never ask permission to change. They come when they will, and they leave when their purpose is fulfilled. Solomon began to see that this is God's mercy. For if joy lasted forever, we'd forget heaven, and if pain lasted forever, we'd lose hope. So he wrapped life in seasons, moments of sunlight and shadow, so we might learn to seek eternity instead of comfort. Time is not your enemy, it's your tutor. It teaches that nothing here lasts, not pain, not pleasure, not power, so your heart will long for what does. Solomon saw this truth too clearly, and it broke him. He realized that even wisdom must bow to time, for all the knowledge in the world cannot stop a sunset. He concluded, not in despair but in awe, I know that whatever God does shall be forever. Nothing can be added to it and nothing taken from it. Man builds, time erases. Man plans, God overrules. Man chases, God waits. And so Solomon lays down his pen, not as a king writing decrees, but as a servant finally surrendering to the rhythm of heaven. He whispers to the reader, to us, stop fighting time, redeem it. Because one day, every season ends, every clock stops, and only what was done in God's timing will remain. If time truly belongs to God, then why do we live like it's ours to waste? How many seasons have we spent chasing what He never called us to pursue? How many years have we lost building towers under the sun when He asked us to build altars under heaven? Think about it. And if you're bold enough to face what that means, hit subscribe. Because this truth might just change your direction and the rest of your time. Chapter 3. The vanity of labor and wealth. There is a strange irony in human life. The more we chase fulfillment, the further it seems to move away. No one understood this more than Solomon. He turned from the study of time to the study of toil. He observed men working endlessly under the sun. Men who rose before dawn and slept long after dusk. Men whose sweat built cities, whose ambition filled palaces, whose pride left them restless even in success. And he wrote with unflinching honesty, I saw all the toil and all the skill in work come from one man's envy of another. This also is vanity and chasing after the wind. Ecclesiastes 4. Solomon called it a grievous evil, that so much of human effort comes not from love or purpose, but from rivalry. We work not to live, but to outdo. We build not for meaning, but for comparison. And even when we win, our victory brings no peace. He watched merchants grow rich, builders raise monuments, farmers store barns full of grain, only to die before they could enjoy what they gathered. He wrote again, a man may labor with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, yet he must leave everything he owns to one who has not toiled for it. This also is vanity and a great evil. Ecclesiastes 2, the injustice of it tormented him. He, the richest of all kings, realized that his wealth was a stranger's inheritance waiting to happen. Everything he had gathered, ships of gold from Ophir, silver without number, chariots, horses, vineyards, would one day be owned by another. perhaps even by a fool. Solomon saw the cycle play out again and again. He wrote, "There is one alone without companion. He has neither son nor brother, yet there is no end to all his labor, nor is his eye satisfied with riches." Ecclesiastes 4:8. That is the portrait of modern man, lonely, surrounded by things but devoid of peace. Solomon called it a miserable business, because the more he studied wealth, the more he saw that it never delivers what it promises. He described the cruel irony of life with piercing clarity. All his days are sorrow, and his work grievous. Even in the night his heart takes no rest. Ecclesiastes 2:23. Think about that. The man who sleeps in silk beds, eats from golden plates, and commands nations, cannot sleep at all. That is the price of a soul chained to labor. He gains the world and loses rest. He earns riches and spends them to repair the body he broke earning them. He spends his strength to gain wealth and then spends wealth to regain strength. That is the vanity of labor, the endless circle of striving that consumes life before it begins to live. Solomon began to question the very purpose of work. Was man created to toil endlessly for things he cannot keep? Was this what God intended? He found no answer that satisfied him under the sun. Because labor, when detached from eternity, becomes slavery. He looked at the world and saw injustice everywhere. The righteous man suffering while the wicked prospered. The honest worker starving while the corrupt feasted. And he said with a weary heart, "I saw the tears of the oppressed, and they had no comforter. On the side of their oppressors there was power." Ecclesiastes 4:1. Even the throne could not shield him from this reality, that life under the sun is not fair, that the scales of justice in this world often tilt toward the wicked. It troubled him deeply. For if work cannot save a man, and wealth cannot satisfy a man, and justice cannot reward a man, then what hope remains? He began to envy simplicity. The quiet laborer who sleeps soundly, the poor man who rejoices over a small meal, the farmer who works for his family rather than for fame. Solomon, the scholar king, concluded that one handful with peace is better than two handfuls with toil and chasing after the wind. His words cut through centuries. Better contentment than competition. Better peace than possessions. Better faith than fortune. He saw what the modern world still refuses to see, that the human heart cannot be filled by what it creates. Because the moment you grasp it, it fades. The moment you own it, it owns you. And deep inside, Solomon confessed that all this pursuit had left him hollow. The laughter of the rich no longer amused him. The applause of nations no longer moved him. He sat in silence, surrounded by everything he ever wanted, realizing he had lost what mattered most, peace with God. He doesn't preach this lesson with anger. He whispers it with regret. He's not condemning labor. He's mourning the emptiness of doing it without meaning. For every builder, every entrepreneur, every dreamer who watches this, listen carefully to his words. You can pour your life into your work, but if God is not the foundation, then your success will one day testify against you. You can build palaces of marble, but without his presence, they become tombs of pride. You can gather silver until your hands tremble to count it, but one day, those same hands will release it in death. Solomon realized that the wealth of a man is not measured in his possessions, but in his peace. And peace cannot be purchased, it must be granted. He ends this reflection not with despair, but with quiet truth. There is nothing better for a man than to eat and drink, and find enjoyment in his labor. This also I saw is from the hand of God. Ecclesiastes 24. In other words, when your work becomes worship, your labor becomes light. When your toil is surrendered to God, it stops being vanity and becomes victory. But the moment you work for yourself, the cycle begins again. Envy, striving, sleepless nights, and a heart that never rests. Why do you think Solomon, the richest man on earth, found no joy in riches? Was it guilt or divine wisdom? Or maybe it was both? Because sometimes God must let a man reach the top so he can finally see how empty the mountain truly is. For every heart chasing wealth, for every soul trapped in endless work, Solomon's pen still whispers across the ages, all is vanity and chasing after the wind. Chapter 4. Wisdom, Folly, and the Meaning of Life. There came a night when Solomon, surrounded by scrolls and scholars, began to question even the one thing he thought could never fail him, his wisdom. He had searched the world for meaning through labor, through wealth, through pleasure. Now, he turned inward, to the mind that once dazzled kings and confounded philosophers. But when he looked into the mirror of his own intellect, he saw a man aging, a man questioning, a man whose brilliance could not save him from the silence of mortality. And he asked the most haunting question of all, "What more has the wise man than the fool?" It is the confession of a thinker broken by truth. Wisdom and folly, he realized, both end in the grave. Both the scholar and the drunkard lie beneath the same earth, their laughter and lectures silenced alike, their names forgotten by generations who never knew them. He wrote, "As it happens to the fool, so it happens to me. And why have I been so wise? For there is no lasting remembrance of the wise any more than of the fool." Ecclesiastes 2 verse 15 to 16. The greatest mind of the ancient world stood face to face with the limits of knowledge. He could understand everything, except the mystery of life's brevity. He could name the constellations, but not the reason men die young. He could explain the motions of the heavens, but not the ache of the human heart. And in that realization, Solomon saw the tragedy of intellect, that wisdom gives clarity, not immortality. It can reveal the pattern of creation, but it cannot explain the Creator. It can shine a light on the road, but it cannot guarantee where that road ends. He observed the vanity of human thought. The philosopher writes his book, and time erases it. The teacher shapes young minds, and death scatters them. The wise man speaks, and the wind carries away his words. For all his understanding, Solomon could not escape the truth that unites kings and beggars alike. The living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing. Their love, their hate, and their envy have long vanished. Never again will they have a share in anything done under the sun. Ecclesiastes 9 verse 6. To the human mind that is despair. To the spirit, it is awakening. Because in that darkness, Solomon began to see light, faint but real. If life under the sun was meaningless, then maybe the answer lay beyond the sun, beyond reason, beyond mortality, beyond the cage of intellect. He began to realize that meaning doesn't come from knowing everything, it comes from knowing God. And so amid his lament, a seed of faith was planted. He wrote quietly, almost like a man rediscovering prayer, "Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man." It wasn't a philosophical statement, it was a cry of surrender. A confession that wisdom without worship is hollow, and knowledge without obedience is ruin. He finally understood what his father David had learned through tears, that a humble heart sees more than a proud mind ever will. For the first time, Solomon stopped studying life and started listening to it. He saw that every sunrise was not just physics, but mercy. Every heartbeat, not biology, but grace. Every unanswered question, an invitation to trust. He began to see wisdom not as power, but as perspective. A lens to glimpse eternity through the fog of the present. He saw that God hides certain things, not to frustrate the wise, but to humble them. And the king who once sought to master knowledge, now bowed before mystery. He wrote in another place, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom." The beginning, not the end. Meaning, no matter how wise you become, if it hasn't led you to awe, to surrender, to worship, you haven't begun yet. Solomon realized that every pursuit of man ends in vanity, until it bends toward reverence. The fool laughs at God. The wise man listens for his voice. But both die. And yet, only one dies with peace. He began to see death not as defeat, but as the great equalizer that reveals what truly matters. Because when the dust returns to the earth and the spirit returns to God who gave it, only one question will remain. Did you know him? All the libraries, the philosophies, the achievements fade in that single moment, and Solomon's brilliance could not deny it. The man who once debated the mysteries of creation now trembled before the Creator himself. This is the turning point of Ecclesiastes. The philosopher becomes the preacher. The scientist becomes the worshiper. The king becomes the penitent son. He still saw the world's injustice, but now through the eyes of a man who knows there's something greater beyond it. He still saw the vanity of life, but now understood that God allows it so the heart will hunger for eternity. Many chase knowledge and still feel empty. Many spend their lives searching for truth, but never kneel before the one who is truth. So let me ask you, if your wisdom hasn't led you closer to God, has it truly been wisdom at all? We live in an age of knowledge, degrees, experts, voices everywhere. But knowledge without direction is the same wind Solomon chased across the desert. If you're ready to rediscover what real wisdom means, not facts, not fame, but faith, subscribe now. Because before this story ends, Solomon will show you that the mind can reason, but only the soul can see. For in the end, the wisest man who ever lived was the one who finally admitted that everything under the sun is meaningless until you kneel before the one who made the sun. Chapter 5, The Fear of God, the beginning of true wisdom. There is a moment in every soul's journey when knowledge falls silent and awe begins to speak. For Solomon, that moment came not in the palace, but in the temple. He walked through its courts, the same temple his own hands had built, and suddenly realized he had built something his heart no longer understood. Worship had become ritual. Sacrifice had become schedule. And the God who once spoke in fire now waited in silence. Then the preacher king wrote, "Guard your steps when you go to the house of God." He was warning us, don't rush into holy spaces with a noisy heart. Don't speak before you listen. Don't turn reverence into routine. Because true wisdom doesn't begin in the classroom, it begins in trembling. Solomon looked around the temple courts and saw priests busy, singers rehearsing, people bargaining for offerings. He saw religion without reverence, and it broke him. He realized that words piled up like smoke can never reach heaven if the heart beneath them is hollow. So he wrote again, with the precision of a man confessing his own failure. Do not be quick with your mouth, nor hasty in your heart to utter anything before God. God is in heaven, and you are on earth, therefore let your words be few. Ecclesiastes 5:2. He, the greatest speaker of kings, had discovered the power of silence. The fear of God, not terror, but trembling reverence became the doorway through which he finally saw truth. He realized the antidote to vanity wasn't more knowledge, but more awe. When a man truly fears God, he stops trying to impress him. He stops performing. He starts listening. Because fear in the biblical sense is not panic, it's posture. It is standing small before an infinite being and finally saying, "You are God, and I am not." Every illusion Solomon had built collapsed in that moment. His wisdom, his power, his reputation, his pride. And in the dust of that collapse, he found peace. He understood that wisdom ends where worship begins. Until the mind bows, the heart cannot rise. Solomon had studied the heavens, now he humbled himself beneath them. He had once tried to explain God, now he simply adored him. He began to see that humility is not weakness, it's alignment. It's the soul returning to its rightful place in the order of creation. Look around today and you'll see the same danger he saw then. Many go to the house of God, but few guard their steps. We speak of him casually, pray like we're giving orders, worship like we're performing songs. Religion without reverence has become noise, beautiful noise, maybe, but still noise. Solomon's voice cuts through the centuries, let your words be few. Because the holiest prayers are often whispered through tears, not shouted through microphones. He found that God listens most when man speaks least. Perhaps that's why silence is so uncomfortable, because in silence, God finally gets a chance to talk. And in that stillness, Solomon heard a truth that would echo until Revelation, that the fear of God is not the end of joy, it's the beginning of it. When you fear him rightly, you love him deeply. When you stand in awe of his holiness, you begin to see the beauty of his mercy. When you remember that he is in heaven and you are on earth, you finally find peace with your place in the universe. This was Solomon's turning point. The philosopher became the worshiper. The mind that once measured the stars now measured itself by grace. He discovered that humility does what intelligence never could. It reconciles man with God. He wrote, "When you make a vow to God, do not delay in paying it, for he has no pleasure in fools." He was no longer teaching theology, he was warning a generation that uses God's name lightly. Because vows are sacred, promises are eternal, and the God who gave us breath still holds us accountable for the words it forms. So Solomon pleads across millennia, fear God, not because he is cruel, but because he is holy, because reverence keeps you real. It rescues your faith from becoming fashion. The fear of God restores proportion. It reminds the rich man that he is dust, the scholar that he is student, the preacher that he is sinner saved by grace. Solomon's heart, once swollen with pride, now bows low beneath the weight of that truth. And out of that posture, real wisdom finally blooms. Maybe this is why our generation feels so empty, because we have knowledge without kneeling. We talk about God like a concept, not a consuming fire. We quote verses but forget who spoke them. You may know scripture, but do you still tremble before God? When was the last time His holiness left you speechless? When was the last time His mercy brought you to tears? If you've lost your awe, maybe this is your wake-up call. Don't scroll past this moment. Don't shrug it off as poetry. This is Solomon's cry to every generation. Return to reverence. Share this truth. Because somewhere, someone you know has knowledge without awe, religion without reverence, and they are starving for the fear that leads to wisdom. For the fear of the Lord is not the enemy of love, it is the root of it. It is the heartbeat of holiness. The silence between creation's praises, the beginning of true wisdom. And when you rediscover that fear, you rediscover peace. Chapter 6, Death, Eternity, and the Final Reckoning. All Solomon's searching ended at one unshakable wall: death. The scholar, the fool, the righteous, the wicked, all stood equal before the same gate. The same fate overtakes them all. He had seen men crowned and men condemned, but the grave swallowed both without prejudice. The king who once counted his gold now counted his days. The strength that built temples now trembled in age. He looked at the world and whispered, "What is the profit of a man's labor in which he toils under the sun? For the sun that once rose on his triumphs would one day rise on his tomb." He wrote, "The dust returns to the ground it came from, and the spirit returns to God who gave it." Those words were not despair, they were revelation, because in that sentence, Solomon glimpsed eternity. He finally understood that death does not erase life, it exposes what it was built on. Everything under the sun ends in dust, but everything under heaven endures forever. He remembered the day he first held the plans for the temple, the cedar, the gold, the perfect symmetry. Now he saw it differently, as a symbol. The temple was temporary, but the presence it housed was eternal. And he realized the same truth about himself. His body, his throne, his wisdom temporary, but the spark inside him eternal. Solomon's philosophical brilliance broke through the veil of mortality. God has planted eternity in the human heart. Ecclesiastes 3:11. Every longing for justice, every cry for meaning, every ache that refuses to be satisfied this world is proof that we were made for another. He looked at his people, busy chasing wealth and status, and thought, they do not even know why they hunger. Because you can't feed an eternal soul with temporary things. That is the secret hidden in Ecclesiastes. Its despair is actually desire in disguise. Human emptiness points toward divine fullness. Solomon began to see death differently, not as the end of existence, but the beginning of accountability. God will bring every deed into judgment, including every secret thing, whether good or evil. Ecclesiastes 12:14. The grave is not silence, it is the courtroom of heaven. He realized that everything a man builds under the sun is tested before the throne. Gold loses its shine there. Titles lose their weight. Only truth endures. For years he had thought wisdom would save him, but wisdom without God only sharpens despair. It shows you every pattern of the universe while leaving your heart unresolved. Without eternity, even insight becomes insanity. But with God, even suffering becomes sacred. Even death becomes doorway. Imagine the moment Solomon understood that. The candles burning low in his chamber, the smell of parchment and ink, the silence between his breaths. He looks back at his life, at every throne room, every celebration, every woman, every victory, and he sees a trail of vanities leading to one conclusion. Without God, even wisdom rots into cynicism. With God, even sorrow becomes seed for glory. He writes not as a cynic now, but as a man awakening. The spirit returns to God who gave it. That single verse turns the whole book inside out. It means you are not your body, you are not your status, you are not your mistakes. You are a breath of the eternal, borrowed for a short while, sent back to its source. This truth levels the proud and lifts the broken. Kings and beggars alike must answer to the same voice. And for the first time in his reign, Solomon found equality beautiful. Death, which terrified the fool, humbled the wise, and in humility he found hope. He began to see life as a test, a brief rehearsal before eternity. Every act of mercy remembered, every hidden sin revealed, every moment recorded. He wrote, "The end of a matter is better than its beginning, and patience is better than pride." because only the end reveals whether a life was lived under the sun or under heaven. If you listen carefully, you can hear the progression. Ecclesiastes doesn't end in nihilism. It climbs out of it, from despair to discovery, from vanity to vision, from time to eternity. Solomon teaches that man's deepest tragedy is not that he dies, but that he lives without preparing to. He calls to every generation, remember your Creator while the days are good. Before the silver cord snaps, before the golden bowl is broken, before the dust returns to dust and the spirit ascends to its giver. He ends not in sorrow, but in reverence, because death no longer frightens the man who has met the eternal. Meaning is only found beyond the sun, and one day, centuries later, that meaning would take flesh in the sun. Where Solomon wrote of vanity, Christ would speak of victory. Where Solomon feared the grave, Christ would empty it. Where Solomon whispered, all is vanity, Christ would cry, it is finished. Solomon glimpsed what we now know fully, that eternity is not an idea, it is a person. And only in him does the heart find home. Do you believe death ends everything or begins something greater? Let's talk below, because maybe the question isn't when we die, but what we lived for before we do. For Solomon, the search was over, and in the stillness of his final words, the wisest man who ever lived finally became the humblest. The ink is almost dry, the candles burn low. An old king sits by the window, watching the last light fade from Jerusalem. He has seen everything, laughter and sorrow, love and betrayal, wisdom and madness, glory and ruin. The crown that once gleamed on his head now feels like a weight he can't bear. And in the quiet of his final years, he takes up the quill one last time. To write not as a ruler, but as a man who finally understands what life was always about. This is how he ends it. Now all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. After all the kingdoms, after all the discoveries, after all the pleasures, the debates, the regrets, he returns to one sentence. Simple, eternal. Fear God and keep his commandments. It is as if his father David's voice still echoes in his memory. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Solomon has come full circle. He ends where his father began, not in wisdom, but in worship. Not in success, but in surrender. He realizes that the secret of life was never hidden in the stars or in the scrolls. It was in the relationship between Creator and creation, between the eternal and the dust. He who once asked for wisdom has now found truth. True wisdom isn't knowing everything, it's trusting the one who does. All his philosophies collapse into one confession. Without the fear of God, all thought is noise. Without obedience, all faith is talk. Without humility, all greatness is vanity. And as he closes his journal, he looks back at his life not with pride, but with clarity. He sees the laughter of the courtyards, the songs of wives and dancers now silent. He sees the glitter of gold and silver, once symbols of power, now meaningless piles of metal. He sees the throne and remembers the nights he sat on it, feeling empty. Solomon, the man who had everything, finally admits he had nothing without God. He writes as one who has walked through every corridor of human experience, pleasure, intellect, power, sin, and repentance. And at the end of that long, echoing hallway, he finds one open door, the door of faith. Ecclesiastes is not a book of despair. It's a map showing the way back from meaninglessness to meaning, from confusion to conviction, from existentialism to faith. Every question it raises is answered not in the mind, but in the soul. Because you can't reason your way to peace, you can only return to it. Solomon had to lose everything to find what mattered, and through his confession, God left us a mirror, a warning, a whisper across the ages. Don't wait until your palace is silent to realize your soul is starving. Look around our world today, and you'll see Ecclesiastes being lived out again. A generation drowning in information, but dying of emptiness. We chase pleasure, productivity, prestige, but the soul remains hungry. We scroll endlessly, achieving everything and feeling nothing. We trade reverence for relevance. We pursue wisdom without wonder. And like Solomon, we mistake motion for meaning. He wrote, "There is nothing new under the sun." He was right, because human nature hasn't changed. Only the tools have. We build digital towers instead of marble ones. We collect followers instead of gold. We worship screens instead of idols carved in stone. But the hunger is the same. And so is the answer. Solomon's voice reaches through 3,000 years to tell us, The purpose of life isn't to escape vanity, it's to redeem it. To live under the sun, but for the one beyond it. To work, to love, to create, but never to forget who gives meaning to it all. He writes his final line as a man who finally sees, "For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether good or evil." Those are not words of fear. They are words of freedom. Because the man who lives for eternity no longer needs to chase the approval of time. And maybe that's what he wanted us to learn. That the fear of God is not the end of joy, but the beginning of it. That obedience isn't bondage, it's alignment. That faith isn't ignorance, it's insight. Solomon, who once debated philosophers, now speaks like a preacher. Simple, raw, unfiltered truth. Fear God and keep his commandments. He knows this is not just advice, it's rescue. Because once the awe of God returns to the heart, the weight of vanity falls away. His story ends with no celebration, no parade, no applause, only peace. The peace of a man who finally found the eternal after wasting a lifetime on the temporary. He looked at the world he once ruled and whispered, "All is vanity." But then, looking up to heaven, he smiled, because for the first time, he knew what wasn't. If Solomon, the man who had it all, still needed God, what makes you think you don't? If the wisest man alive bowed at the end of his reasoning, what should we do with our fleeting days? Don't let another week pass chasing the wind. Don't spend another season building empires that eternity will erase. Hit subscribe, not for the sake of the channel, but to remind yourself that truth still matters. Because Solomon's journey isn't just history, it's prophecy for the modern soul. Everything we gain, everything we lose, everything we learn means nothing if we forget the one who gave us breath. So fear God, keep his commandments. And remember, this is not the end of Solomon's story, it's the beginning of wisdom. The candle burns low, the parchment glows softly in the light. The old king dips his quill one last time and writes the final words of his life. The room is silent, except for the slow scratching of ink. Then the hand that once ruled nations stops. He closes the scroll, and as the ink dries, a whisper crosses the centuries. Fear God, keep his commandments, for God will bring every deed into judgment, every secret thing, whether good or evil. The wisest man who ever lived ends his story with surrender, not a proclamation of power, but a confession of faith. And if Ecclesiastes teaches anything, it's this. A life without God will always feel like a life unfinished. You can gather riches, you can build empires, you can surround yourself with beauty and still feel empty, because the soul was never designed to be satisfied by dust. Solomon learned that truth too late, but he wrote it down so you wouldn't have to. Everything else, our pride, our wealth, our worries, is vapor. Moments that slip through trembling fingers. Even the monuments we build will one day crumble into silence. But what is done for God, what is born from love, what is shaped by obedience, endures beyond the sun. Listen closely. Can you hear it? The echo of a king's repentance, the sound of wisdom kneeling before holiness. It's the same echo that haunts every restless heart, a reminder that eternity still calls your name. And so the question remains, what are you building? A kingdom under the sun, or a legacy under heaven? One will vanish, the other will last forever. Comment your answer below, because one day even kings must stand before the true king. This is the Book of Ecclesiastes, the confession of a king, the journal of a soul who chased everything under the sun and finally found peace in the one who made it. Subscribe, reflect, return.